Hello and welcome everyone to U.S.-Japan Council's Regional Women in Leadership event. Today's webinar is entitled Stories of Women in the South and Beyond. My name is Masami Tyson and I will be your host and moderator for today's event. Before diving into the program, just a few words on U.S.-Japan Council and the Women in Leadership series. The U.S.-Japan Council, or USJC, develops and connects global leaders to create a stronger U.S.-Japan relationship. It is an organization whose members believe people-to-people relationships are a powerful way to bring together leaders in the U.S. and Japan to address and create solutions to mutual concerns. USJC continues to focus on the topic of women's leadership and hosts several events and programs on creating opportunities for active discourse and stronger networks, inspiring women and men of all generations. The Regional Women in Leadership series is such a program, which is generously supported by the Embassy of Japan and provides a forum for discussion of issues surrounding women in leadership and an opportunity to encourage and inspire one another, among other things. So today's event is no exception. It will consist of two parts. Part one will be a panel of three very accomplished business leaders here in the South and beyond, and we will have an honest conversation about leadership. And the speakers will talk about the challenges they've faced, the rewards, and share their wisdom and lessons learned along the way. Part two will be a one-on-one interview or a fireside chat with another extremely distinguished businesswoman here in Nashville, Tennessee, in which she will also share her thoughts on leadership and her journey to success and becoming a leader and mentor. So without further ado, I will move on to part one. Speakers for part one, please turn on your cameras and microphones as I introduce you. So in no particular order, first we have Jessica Kennett Cork. She is the Vice President of Community Engagement and Corporate Communications at YKK Corporation of America, and she is based in Atlanta, Georgia. Next, we have Nozomi Morgan, who is the CEO and founder of Michiki Morgan Worldwide, also based in Atlanta, Georgia. And then we have Maki Futami, who is a USJC Council leader and Managing Director of Trust Solutions, Pricewaterhouse LLP, and she is based in Cincinnati, Ohio. So thank you, panelists, for being here today. I am very honored to be your moderator today. So what I'd like to do in lieu of the first question is, first I'd like you to introduce yourselves further, because obviously I just read your titles and your organization. So after you introduce yourselves, or perhaps you can sort of intertwine your background and your experiences in the first topic, which is this. I'd like you to think about and answer the following questions. Are you a leader, since this is a leadership event? And if so, how and why? When did you realize you are a leader? And did you plan on becoming a leader when you set out in your professional lives? And if you did plan on becoming a leader, how did you make sure to get there? Was there a particular person or event that inspired you to become a leader? So that's a lot of questions. And I don't expect you to answer all the questions, but if you'd like to speak about those topics and also introduce yourselves a little further. I'd like to ask Nozomi-san to please start.
Yes, thank you, Masami-san. And good afternoon or hello to everyone here who's on this webinar. Thank you for joining us. So my name is Nozomi Morgan, and I'm the founder and CEO of Michiki Morgan Worldwide. And as Masami-san said, I live in Atlanta, Georgia. But I grew up, I was born and raised in Japan, and I call my hometown Tokyo. So, the work that I do is at Michiki Morgan Worldwide is we are an intercultural leadership consulting firm, And we work with multicultural, multinational organizations like the Japanese companies operating here in the US and the US companies that are operating in Japan and Asia and beyond. And we work with them to help them to overcome the cultural challenges that they have and become the best place to work for their employees. So they can be innovative, creative, and do, the best work that they can. So yes, Masami-san asked lots of questions. So I guess I'll answer the very first one that you said, are you a leader? And the quick and simple answer would be yes, absolutely. One, I'm a leader in my organization and leader in the community that I am, but also I would say, and this actually is the most important leader, would be I'm a leader of my own life and my own self. And that's was really how, we talk about leadership. I went to business school. We talk about leadership theory and all that kind of stuff. But I think until I really decided to actually launch my own company, I don't know if I really was a leader of my own life. I graduated college in Japan and worked in Tokyo for 8 years, and then decided to come to the States to go to business school. And then I decided to stay, and I worked in the airline industry for 5 years and working for a global American company. And the company went through a big merger, and through that time, I saw a lot of talented people become smaller or getting laid off. When I say smaller, meaning not as confident as they used to be. Teams and leaders were getting laid off, or departments or teams were disappearing left and right and all that. But really going through that time, I started to realize how important it is for like the leadership when you go through those big changes. And I think that's something you can see that all of us have gone through during, especially with COVID, like when you're at a time of this uncertainty and changes, really leadership is that connection, what pulls everyone forward. And I really felt that that was something I wanted to explore more, but also as a minority in the organization, being an international, being women, being Asian, like all those labels and things you can put on. I really felt invisible in the organization, and it was a wonderful company, but that's just how I felt. And I through that process, I really was burnt out and kind of was seeking for what I really want to do in my life. And it was a time of reflection and really looking into my heart and soul and trying to pull out what I really want to do. And the answer was that I really want to work with people. I really want to help people like me to become a better leader, to really shine their bright light so they can do like great work, like to really live their purpose. And that's when I've decided to leave corporate America, and start the company Michiki Morgan Worldwide. And that's when I think I truly became a leader of my own life, which led to becoming a better leader in the workplace and beyond, in the community and beyond. So it's a long answer to your question. I know I didn't answer everything, but yeah.
No,
yes.
That's a wonderful answer. And I did ask a lot of questions. So thank you for answering that so beautifully. And so what I hear you saying is that when you decided to lead your own life, that is, decide to do the things that you really wanted to do, that's when you became a leader. I mean, it's kind of circular in that sense. It's in a good way. But by realizing what you wanted to do, by actually pursuing that dream and attaining it, you have grown into becoming a leader. Is that fair? Is that what you said?
Absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
And I love that confidence too. I love the way you said, yes, I am a leader. And I think maybe, and I don't want to speak on everyone's behalf, but as women and then as Japanese women, I know that sometimes that is a hard thing to admit. So thank you for that. Maki, are you a leader?
If I can figure out this unmuting myself, I am a leader. Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? Yes? Am I freezing?
Yes,
Okay.
you're good.
Right. Okay. Hi, my name is Maki Futami. I'm really excited to be here today to share my story. And then thank you for inviting to be part of it. I am a managing director in trust solutions at PwC. But a simple word, another word is I'm an auditor. I help support private companies, especially Japanese inbound companies. My professional bio is included in the event information site. So let me talk a little bit about my personal bio. Born and raised in Japan, moved here after my school, and it became CPA. And I worked in places like New York City, Washington, D.C., and now I'm in Cincinnati. I'm physically in Cincinnati, and most of my clients are in Kentucky, Tennessee, and somewhere at Midwest too. I have an 80-year-old boy, and he's a mini me, and he means more to me. I think of myself as a learner and a leader and an overachiever and a people person. Before I forget, I'm not a D&I professional, and what I share today is not PwC's point of view, and it's just my experience and beliefs. So let me just disclaim that first. So am I a leader? I am a leader, I think so. When I realized I'm a leader was when I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I started my career in 2002. Throughout my career, I've made great friends, met mentors and sponsors along the way. When I was a staff, I did not question working under the people, doing data entries, and mundane work. As I moved up, I started to feel frustration about work and others' leadership style. That's probably when I started to think about staying at PwC for a longer period of time and trying to make the workplace better for me and other people. About 12 years ago, a long time ago, I've been at PwC for 20 years. When I was a manager, I participated in my first diversity and inclusion training. It was called Asian onboarding training. That sounds horrible, but that's what it was called. It was a rude awakening for me. I was struggling to move up above manager level, so-called bamboo ceiling. The training was to highlight traditional American leadership style and then typical Asian values and identify differences and how to make Asian professionals more assimilated to American workplace. That's why it was called onboarding training. I'm sure the firm wouldn't put it that way, but that's how I perceived it back then. For example, American leaders are assertive, decisive, and loud, confident. Asians are quiet and analytical. Harmony and consensus is important. I believe that in a good way. And back then I thought to be successful, I have to become an American. Traditional Japanese style wasn't gonna cut it. Since then, I worked really hard to become my interpretation of American leader, but it was so uncomfortable. I knew it wasn't right. I was trying to be someone I was not. And of course, I couldn't do it well. I did okay faking it, but I always got feedback like Maki has to improve executive presence. Fast forward to now, or 5 years ago, I had an opportunity to talk to our diversity officer, and I told her how I felt. And for years, I felt like I was molded to be an American versus who you are, and then why people can't accept me as who I am. I don't take all credits, but I'm sure the tide turned and everybody else was feeling the same way. So I started to feel a shift in D&I strategy and the movement. Since then, now differences in background are more embraced, and you're encouraged to be authentic and unapologetically you, and to bring your own leadership. And where I work at, I never had a role model for years or leaders who look like me. And I shared that observation with my coach and people I worked with. And one of my coaches told me that I can be the role model for others and just be the leader you aspire to be. So that's why I'm still here, and then I claim myself to be a leader. And maybe one more story. So I coach other Asian professionals, and I talk to a lot of other Asian professionals. And one of staff told me that, oh, you're different. You don't have accent, and you can talk loud. You can do this, and you can do that, and you look comfortable. I was taken aback by that comment. If I gave that impression to everybody, I was doing it so well. I was baking it so well. But I used to be one of them, and I still struggle. And then I was in their shoes. So that made me realize that I have to continue to share my stories and my experience to give hope and encourage everybody. And that's another reason that I'm here today.
Wow, Maki-san, thank you so much for that response. There's so much in there that I just need to go sit down and think about your response for several hours after this event. But I just love the way that you, first of all, gave such an honest and inspiring story and answer in how you really grappled through this and really also helped your organization, understand this very, very challenging topic. So thank you for that. Okay. Jessica?
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today. I'm Jessica Cork. I'm Vice President of Community Engagement and Corporate Communications at YKK Corporation of America. I don't know how many of you have heard of YKK, but I guarantee that you use our products every single day. We actually manufacture 10 billion zippers a year, among other fascinating products. So you might, I know that you've got our products probably, you're wearing them right now. And I work at the, basically the Western Hemisphere headquarters. So my office, we're headquartered in Tokyo, but office covers all the countries from Canada down to Brazil and Argentina. And since this is a US Japan Council event, I'll explain just very briefly about my Japan connection, because unlike my my two co-panelists here, I of course was not born in Japan. However, I've been interested in Japan for as long as I can remember, at least since I was 10 years old. I first went to Japan back in high school when I did an 8-week homestay with a Japanese family that did not speak any English, and I spoke zero Japanese. And this was back in the days before the internet, and I didn't have a single phone call with my parents. I was basically just went to Japan when I was 15 and stayed there for 8 weeks. And that was just a life-changing experience for me, especially in terms of trying to build some confidence and some belief in myself, and that I can make my dreams come true. So I came back and decided to get a bachelor's degree in Japanese. So I went to school to study Japanese. I spent a year in Tokyo as an exchange student. And then after graduating, I spent 3 years in a town of 4,000 people in rural Hiroshima Prefecture, working as a coordinator for international relations on the JET program. And then I came back and I moved to Georgia to work as an interpreter. So basically my career has had lots of twists and turns throughout the way, and the only common denominator is basically Japanese language. So I pivoted from government role to working as an interpreter in a manufacturing company, found out within a year that I hate interpreting, and I had no idea what to do with the rest of my life at that point, because here I have a degree in Japanese, and I thought people who have degrees in Japanese do interpreting, and then I found out I disliked it. But luckily, kind of fate intervened, and I was able to get a job that I absolutely loved at the Japanese consulate in Atlanta, where I spent 11 years, and now I've been at YKK for 9 years. So this is back into the corporate world. So, to your question about being a leader, that's a really hard question for me to answer. And I would say, I guess it really depends on how you define leader. I think for a long time, I really didn't think of myself as a leader. And part of it is, I think, the way that we perceive leaders, like what leaders are. And I actually looked it up in the dictionary just to see what does the dictionary say. And this is Merriam-Webster, says a leader is a powerful person who controls or influences what other people do. And I'd say, well, by that definition, I don't know, because I definitely don't try to seek power for myself. I'm really not interested in that aspect of leadership. I really like working behind the scenes. Like, I feel like that's where I really thrive. And I definitely don't want to be the kind of person that controls what other people do or tries to force them to think in a certain way. What I love to really do is to find out, what do people around me need? Like, what problems are they having? And then what solutions, can I bring to them, and then seek feedback and buy-in from them, to implement that solution rather than trying to force it through. And I'm actually really a huge fan of the Japanese process of nemoashi. It's really like quietly going around and getting buy-in from the people around you, informally laying the groundwork and going around. And that is something that my Japanese colleagues have taught me over the years, that, very effective way of actually kind of leading, but from behind, with the support, of others around you. And so, if we go by what the traditional dictionary definition is of a leader, I was going to say, I don't think I'm a leader. But on the other hand, I really think we need a better definition. I mean, that's a terrible definition, in my opinion. And actually, our former chairman and CEO of YPK, Alex Gregory, he actually introduced me to the idea of servant leadership. And it's really a style of leading that he really modeled through how he was as a leader, and was something that really, inspired me and continues to inspire me to this day. And really what this is definition of a servant leader is one who focuses primarily on the growth and well-being of the people and the communities to which they belong. And they share power, and they put the needs of others first. And then they help people to develop and to perform as highly as possible. So that's really the kind of leader that I aspire to be. I'm definitely still a work in progress, I would say, but that's kind of what I keep as my model, like, my type of role model is someone who acts as a servant leader. I recently heard an interview with Hubert Jolie, who is the former chairman and CEO of Best Buy, and he had a really great quote. He said, "Great leaders don't climb to the top, they're carried." And he meant by other people that are supporting them and bringing them to the top, just, in spite of what they're doing. So yeah, I think that's my answer on leadership.
Wonderful. And I mean, what amazing answers you've each provided, such different perspectives, and yet such clear definitions, I think, of leadership, and truly inspiring, to say the least. So Jessica, you clearly touched on this next question that I was going to ask each of you, but perhaps you can expand a little more on what you just started talking about. My next question is, so what is your leadership style? Clearly you are all leaders. I know, Jessica, you said you hesitated to call yourself a leader, but you clearly are certainly modeling that servant leadership model. So can you talk a little bit about that? What are you like as leaders? And again, was that a style that you sort of had inherently, or did you develop it? Were there mentors or advisors and Jessica, you've already touched on that, but how about we start with you, Jessica, if you wanted to expand a little bit more on what you started talking about now.
Yeah, sure. So as I said, I think we, somewhat have these impressions, or are told by society kind of what a leader is. And I actually know of a leader who, he strides into every single meeting and just seems absolutely at ease, at all times, and will go right to the front of the room, take a seat right in the center, front row, great confidence. I've never seen this person get flustered. I've seen this speak, extemporaneously on any topic, no preparation whatsoever. And that, that's just who he is. And I think that there's a lot of us, when we think about like what are the traits of a leader, like we're really picturing that person, right? So like really uber confident, very charismatic. A lot of times male. That's just sort of the reality. Also, it's the male leaders. And for a lot of years, like I really thought that's what a leader was, but the problem is that's not my style at all. And so I think that was part of where I got stuck in thinking myself as the leader, because there was nobody around me. That was kind of the model that I had. And it's not just this one person. I saw lots of people that were like that around. And the thing for me, like, I'm actually a very introverted person. I'm, can be pretty bad at small talk. I can definitely say, like, networking is not my favorite thing. Actually, I think LinkedIn has been game changing. I love networking, like, through LinkedIn, because I don't have to be walking around a room introducing myself to people I don't know. I had really struggled with giving my opinion freely until quite recently. Like, that's really something I would say probably in the last 5-6 years I'm more comfortable. I never give, I don't do public speaking unless I have a lot of preparation. Like, I'm not going to be the person who's going to just be standing up winging it with no preparation, right? So, that's really who I am. And I did spend a lot of time trying to change some of those things, like certainly public speaking. Everyone who is in a leadership position at some point needs to be able to public speak. And so I did put a lot of effort into trying to improve those kinds of skills. But on the other hand, I really love to work behind the scenes, as I mentioned, like small teams, small groups, getting buy-in. I love to do a lot of deep thinking. I do like solitary work as well. And I also like working, on the details. And so, that it described that way, I'm probably the polar opposite of the person that I just described to you. But actually, a couple of years ago, I read Susan Cain's book called Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And that book was life-changing to me. She wrote in her book that introverts by their nature tend to have a few key passions in their lives, and they ascend into positions of leadership through a commitment to what they're doing, and they become leaders almost in spite of themselves. And I felt finally, like, it's almost like to Maki's point too, it's like finally someone who's like speaking to me, like who's like me and looks like me and acts like me. And this is someone who's in a leadership position. And I think it's definitely true for myself. I started to see some of the things that she described as being a good traits of leadership. So like, I'm really passionate about my work, I really, get really excited about projects that I'm working on or finding solutions to really hard problems. And of course, once I commit to things, I can really try to see them through the end. And the thing is, that's also part of leadership, right? Like, part of the traits that leaders have, yes, definitely self-confidence and charisma. They are really important leadership traits, and I'm working on those things. But at the same time, things like drive or being creative or being really motivated, or being able to present your ideas well, those are also really important leadership traits too. And I think, we were talking a little bit about, diversity and inclusion, and we need to remember, like, we don't just need people that are of different genders or appearances or backgrounds. Like, we also need people who think differently and maybe lead differently. So maybe as leaders, we do need like the big picture, really charismatic, inspirational people, but we also need the detail-oriented people like me. We need the people who come always prepared with all the data, like to back up what they're saying, the people that are thinking really deeply before they're speaking. And we definitely need people who know how to get the buy-in of the other people around them. So, and then the last thing that I'll just comment on, I'm sorry, it was a long answer, but I always was also wondering why I've gravitated so much towards Japanese culture and Japanese organizations. I've actually never worked in an American organization, so I find it so interesting, Nozomi-san, Maki-san, working in these American organizations. I've been in Japanese ones for the past 25 years, but I really think that it's partly because of some of the traits that I possess, things like, trying to quietly reflect on things before speaking, or teamwork, or like attention to detail and follow through. And also in some respects, servant leadership. I think those are many of the things that are also valued by Japanese society and probably by other Japanese leaders. And so it tends to like fit my personality style in some ways as well. And I wonder a lot if I ever would have had like what my current title is inside an American organization. And I tend to think, well, maybe not. I don't know, but maybe not. So it's interesting to think about.
That is an interesting question. And, you must have read my mind, because as you were speaking, I was thinking about diversity in the context of leadership and how important that is, that we need different kinds of leaders in our society and even in one organization. So Let's hear from Maki, who I think has a different leadership style from Jessica. So go ahead.
Sure. So my leadership style definitely changed from pretend to be an American way to be, assertive when you need to, or listen well, or work in a collaborative way over the years. Harmony and consensus is still important, and it's like our lives, and then we believe in that. But I facilitate the discussion to reach team's action plans together. It's a blend of American and Japanese way. When I need to, in corporate America, I dial it up to full-blown direct way. And then when I'm at Japanese companies or talking to Japanese management, I can dial it down to softer way. It's definitely something you grow into and then keeps changing and still changing. Adapt different styles and adjust for people you work with. And then I think most important thing is to listen and communicate, share feelings, and act. Going back to my agent onboarding training example, I think what I should have focused back then was quality and traits, then Asian versus Japanese, American versus Japanese. And Jessica mentioned, leadership qualities and traits are somewhat universal. You want to be assertive and collaborative or creative, right? And then innovative. Those are all the same. And how to execute is up to you, and then bring your own style to make it happen. That's my comment.
That's really, really interesting too, in that the way you execute those values may be different, but ultimately I do think leadership has every style has a common thread and common qualities. I think you brought out that answer very clearly, Maki. Thank you so much. So Nozomi-san?
Yeah, so I'm an introvert too. So kind of, and Maki-san, when you talked about dialing up and down, I can relate to that a lot, working in an American company as a Japanese. One episode that I remember and love to share with you all is I was dealing with a partner. I was in a position or group that had partnership relationship with other companies, and I was negotiating some deal at that time, and it wasn't going our way, my company's way. And I remember that I was getting really emotional and getting sort of, I guess, assertive, but maybe angry at the same time. And I remember my colleagues around me, because they could hear me, would say, like, go Nozomi, like that's, it's great that you're getting angry. And I remember I felt really ashamed because that is not really who I am. And that kind of emotional side that I was showing was not because that was an effective way to do it. It wasn't my choice. Actually, it came from just being extremely frustrated. And that really wasn't the way I wanted to show up. And I felt really uneasy, and kind of going back to, what Jessica said and what Maki said about, those different leadership or different communication styles, just being loud or being assertive is not always the answer. And you really do have to find your own place that you feel authentic and you feel that it's really, really who you are. And I want to kind of approach this in a little bit different way. But when I think about leadership style, I think more about, as a leader, what is the deepest attributes, or I don't know, maybe you can call it philosophy, that I really follow, and what's most important to me. And as the more and more as my business grows and my team grows, and as I evolve as a leader of my own company, what I've found, what actually has a direct correlation with our business growth is around trust. And I think there's three types of trust. One is that trusting yourself, trusting myself, and there's trusting in others, and also trusting in the universe or trusting in God, whatever higher power that you want to call it, but trusting in what you cannot see. And the more and more I'm able to trust those three, and definitely it's a journey. I'm not perfect at any of them, but I can see that leads to becoming a better leader. And one of the trusting others is something that I really focus on, is trusting that everyone is inherently good. Really believing that everyone is here and trying to do their best. And sometimes, you know, some people are not performing at the level that they can or want to, but I know, and I really trust it's not because they don't want to, it's because there's some reason. And as a leader, I'm here to figure that out. I'm here to support them. You know, Jessica talked about servant leadership, but really here to serve my team so they can do their best job, because I trust that's the reason why they're here. And if it's not, then that's something we have to discuss. And that has really helped me and to navigate through how to communicate, how to create processes or doing things, or how to show up. That has really freed me from thinking too much into the details of how to do things, and just really being in a space of being that trusting person, being that, you know, loving person, the person, the leader who really cares and trusts my own team, my clients, my vendors, my partners, my suppliers, and really trusting everyone is here to doing, you know, the best work and being their best self. And how can I be the person to support them when it's not happening in the way that we all want to? And that actually, in order to trust, though, what I also realize is that you need to have the capacity to do that, right? Because when you're burnt out and so tired and so stressed out, it's really difficult to trust people because you're so tired, like your energy level, it is so low. So that's another thing that I realize as to be a good leader. Also, that means going back to being a leader of yourself is really, how do you create more capacity as a leader? And that is taking care of yourself, you know, taking care mentally, physically, like all of that also is part of being a good leader as well. So leadership capacity and trusting people and really believing that everyone here is inherently good. I don't know if we call it leadership style, but those are things that are really important to me.
Yeah, wonderful answer. Absolutely. I do think that is part of being a leader. Without that trust, I don't think you can move forward or accomplish anything. I think, and one thing you said, Nozomi-san, and I think the other two alluded to as well, is really sort of empowering others through your leadership is such an important trait of being a good leader, which each of you clearly is. So let me move on to the next question. And I almost moved right into that when Jessica was speaking about her leadership style. So one of the things I personally struggle with in this space is the idea of trying to figure out my own leadership style and the best style that works for me. And yet sometimes I feel like I should be that sort of leader that Jessica was describing, the strong, sort of always, goes and sits in the center and, always able to exhibit that, I don't know, the sort of the image, or maybe even too much caricature type of leadership style. And I struggle with that as I think about things like gender and then race, even age. I'm now no longer needing to struggle with that, but I did for many years. And as Asians, we look younger. So I really struggle with that balance, honestly, and I'm still trying to figure that out. So my next question is, since this is, again, a women's leadership event, let me ask some questions specific to that. So are there barriers to women becoming leaders or being accepted as leaders, being effective leaders? And what have they been for you personally, if any? And what are some of the things that might impact a woman's ability to lead or be a leader? So take it away, Maki-san.
Sure. So barriers, a few things come to mind, but maybe these three things are most significant: stereotypes, and then self-limitation, and not wishing it out loud. So I'm gonna talk about it one by one. So stereotypes and self-limitation are somewhat related, but many stereotypes for women, especially for Asian women, exist. And when we do one thing to confirm that stereotype, people believe that to be the fact and don't see things past that. For example, if I tear up for a second, oh, she's too emotional. If I ask for other people's opinion, oh, she's not decisive, what have you. I'm sure everybody has an experience, but anything and everything we do, these things will come with. Or in Japan, females are often expected to work for guys. If my name is listed with other guy's name, people assume that I'm the other guy's subordinate. I won't be spoken to or not worthy enough. It all comes from a stereotype and wrong expectations. And then kind of adding on to that, self-limitation. We worry about those chatters and what others will think if I do this or if she does this. She's too aggressive or too weak. And we shrink and stop doing what we do well. We worry too much, right? Maybe we don't need to worry about that much in unleashing ourselves. Don't let stereotypes bring you down. I travel a lot for work, and then everybody kind of knows this, and Masami-san too. It's less now for COVID, but I still do. Recently, I was away on business trip for 6 weeks. I left my son at home and I went. Every time I talk about that, and the first thing comes out of everybody's mouth is, "Who's watching your son?" or variations of that. When a guy's on business trip, I wonder if he ever gets questions like that. It's just the stereotype. And then, like Nozomi-san said, I don't think there's a bad intention behind that. But it's our responsibility to make people aware when it happens, real time. Comments like that are coming from stereotype. And then, it's just lack of awareness. And last thing, third thing I said was wishing out loud. This is my mentor, Lisa, used to work at PwC, is quote, "If others don't know what do you want to do, what do you wish, they can't help you make it happen." So nothing is wrong with making a wish. It's your wish. Wish it out loud. And doesn't have to be done in a demanding way. And I think we tend to just keep it to ourselves. And then, it's not right to wish what I want to do or make other people know that what I wish. And I always use this as an example. When you go grocery shopping, you have tons of bags to carry inside in the car, or you're carrying them. You want your significant other or kids or somebody else to help you carry them, but you don't ask. You do it all by yourself and carry tons of bags and making several trips. Get upset about the fact that others didn't help you. And I do it too. I probably did it yesterday. I'm sure others are willing to help if you asked. And then they probably don't know that you were doing that. They probably didn't know that you wanted them to help. It might be faster if you do it, but if others help you, you don't have to do them. Make others help you. You don't have to do them all. Thinking like that or wishing it loud, and that's how Lisa put it, but that made me kind of feel better, and also easier to ask people for help, and then kind of overcome the barrier of being a leader or being successful in the organization.
Yes, for sure. Thank you. Before I proceed to Nozomi and then Jessica with this question, I also wanted to ask if, since you guys are both here in the South, if there was additionally a barrier here, if you're comfortable talking about that, being in the South versus some of the other locations you've lived in previously, maybe even compared to Japan for both of you, since you've worked in Japan as well. So Nozomi-san, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So everything Maki-san said and would be, so I want to share my own experience. The first position out of business school, I was hired, or I was selected into a leadership program with a major airline. And my first position that I chose with this leadership program was to work in the cargo division. And the reason was because the cargo is like a division, is like a small business in the big business, and it's really robust and it's really global and it's really exciting. I thought it was really exciting. But the person who was heading the leadership program asked, and I'll step back. So because the company I was working for had a major hub in Japan, so a lot of this work naturally would be working very closely with the Japanese operations. And cargo, if you can kind of imagine, I don't know, kind of old school, like this really macho kind of place. So it's really masculine, even in this kind of in the States and especially in Japan. So the person who was in charge of the leadership program, who did the assignments, came to me and said, I, respect your decision, but I'm a little concerned for you. If you can really perform or do well in this male-dominated department, because we want you to succeed. He didn't say exactly that words, but that was the gist of what he said. And, I know they meant well, going back to they meant well, they cared for me and they wanted me to succeed. But that, gave me like a light bulb moment went on, and it's like, oh, this is how we don't get opportunities, because they are trying to protect me. And I was lucky that this person actually came to me and I had the choice to say, so he gave me another option and said, this I think might be a better fit for you from that kind of gender perspective. And I said, no, I can do this. I want to do this. This is what I want to do. But again, I was lucky that they actually gave me an option. And came and talked to me. But if you can only imagine how many times in our lives that people thought out of good and kind of protecting this, poor Nozomi, that, and that we're not seeing or getting those opportunities. So I think those are barriers, again, not coming from a bad place, but out of ignorance. And out of that place. And those are places where I think, like Mike-san said that beautifully with her mentor, saying we have to really voice our wishes. Because if they don't know, they might be doing unintentionally, like subconsciously, they're doing things because they think that's the right thing for us. And that goes back to I think why I keep on saying about leadership, like self-leadership, is because we have to pave our own ways. Because other things we can't control. We can't control the companies, we can't control our bosses, we can only influence them, but we can't change them. The only thing we can change and make a difference is ourselves and the actions that we take. So, from that perspective, if you can kind of understand that, I think the barriers, if I look back, and yes, I could say the system is, broken and all that, but the truth is, I think really, if I look at the biggest barrier has been in myself, not being clear of what I want, and also holding myself back, thinking that might not be a good career choice. That's too risky as a female, or that is not what, there's books written about this, but how women think way too much, worry too much ahead about, like, oh, if I have a child, if I have a baby, I can't do this or that, and hold ourselves back. So I really think a lot of the barriers, yes, we need more support. It's, better to have role models and all that. But a lot of the barriers actually has come from within myself, and not going after things that I actually want, not giving myself permission to dream and to want more, and actually taking risks and actually failing and making mistakes and being disliked. Like, all of that has really held me back because of the people pleasing, part that I have, because I want to be the nice girl. I want people to like Nozomi. All that kind of stuff has really, I think, has been, honestly, if I be super honest with myself, I think has been the biggest barrier for me and for a lot of us.
Well, thank you for such an honest answer. I never struggle with those things, Nozomi.
Okay. Of course you don't.
Of course I do. All right, thank you. So Jessica, what about for you? What are the barriers?
Sure, such great answers, Nozomi-san, Maki-san. For me, my dad was actually a really involved father, and my mom, was a career woman, and my dad took paternity leave. So like I grew up thinking, I was gonna have no barriers. Like I just thought, I had all this ambition, and I knew I was gonna have it all. I was gonna have a job. I was gonna have a family. And all I needed to do was like do what Sheryl Sandberg said. I was like, find a life partner that supports you, and then I'm going to lean in as hard as I can. And that worked really, really well. Honestly, I didn't think that I really had any problems until I had my first child. And I realized sort of it was setting in on what that really meant about the whole kind of like have it all, meaning doing it all. I don't have any family or in-laws nearby. My job at the time only had 3 weeks of maternity leave. Like I had no sick leave, I had no family leave. And I was trying to put in 110% at work. And then it just got harder and harder. I had baby number 2, and then baby number 3, and then baby number 4. And I have to say, honestly, when I was in my 30s, I don't remember anything in my 30s, actually. It's a complete blur because I had 4 kids under the age of 7, and I was working full time, and I was also getting my master's degree at night. And so I basically stopped sleeping, but I refused to ask for help. I never asked for help. I was so determined that I was going to be the perfect mother. I was making homemade organic baby food. I was doing cloth diapers. I was cooking every night. I was doing everything at home, and I was still putting in 110% at work. And then finally, it just got to the point where I was just absolutely, utterly burned out. And at that point, right around the time, that was when, I don't know how many of you read Anne-Marie Slaughter's article in The Atlantic on why women still can't have it all. And she was talking about how women put this tremendous, pressure on themselves as the society to say that you have to be the primary caregiver plus the breadwinner, like on top of it, and try to do everything perfectly. And so I would say, that was the biggest struggle for me, was really just the needing to realize that you absolutely have to let other people help you. You have to allow, your significant other to step up. A lot of times he wants to do things, and I wasn't letting him do it because, my way is the better way, or I have to do it myself because, I'm the mom. So that was really the biggest barrier for me, in terms of basically advancing both in my career, but also being a good parent, was refusing to let other people help me and refusing to ask for help.
Well, thank you again for that very, very honest answer. And I am sad to have to say that this is sort of the end of our session here, but such great responses, such great thoughts, things to really chew on. I learned a ton. And again, I need to really sort of sit back and think about each of your responses today. So again, thank you so much for being part of this panel and for being so willing to be honest and transparent and sharing your wisdom. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we will move on to part 2 of this session. So if Chris, please turn on your camera and microphone. So for the audience, again, this will be part 2 of our session today. We are still on the same topic of women in leadership. And I'm very excited to introduce to you the person that I will be interviewing, engaging in a one-on-one discussion with for the next 30 minutes or so. We have Christine Karbowiak, who recently retired from Bridgestone Americas. And she is someone that I call a mentor for myself, community leader, very famous around here in Nashville, Tennessee, very well accomplished. And I really don't want to use up all our time reading her very extensive biography, but just to give you some highlights. Prior to her retirement in 2020, Chris oversaw all of Bridgestone America's risk and reputation. management departments, including communications, corporate security, safety, audit, government relations, etc. She was also a member of the Bridgestone Americas Executive Committee, and she also chaired Bridgestone America's Board Audit Committee and served on the board's Governance and Risk Committee. She was also the chair of Bridgestone America's Trust Fund. She also was responsible for negotiating Bridgestone's sponsorship agreement with IOC, the International Olympic Committee, in the recent Tokyo Olympics. I'm sure that was very, very interesting, exciting, Chris. And then she also was the Chief Sustainability Officer for Bridgestone Corporation, the headquarters of Bridgestone Global Head Office. Now, she says that she's retired, but we all know that she really isn't, because she continues to play a very key role in supporting Bridgestone Corporation as a consultant in connection with the company's participation in the World Business Council Sustainable Development and the Tire Industry Project, which is an initiative of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, a very, very important topic in the world today. And then, of course, she also serves on many, many community organizations and boards and volunteers a lot, one of which would be the Japan America Society of Tennessee. So, and then, of course, Chris also has had numerous recognitions and awards throughout her professional life. But I'd like to highlight the fact that in 2020, she was awarded the Order of the Rising Sun Gold Rays with Rosette by the government of Japan for her contribution to promoting friendly relations and mutual understanding between Japan and the United States. So, Chris, thank you so much for agreeing to be here today and to share your wisdom and talk about leadership. So I'm going to start with the same question that I asked the panel. So Chris, I'm going to ask you an obvious question, but I'm going to ask you to answer it. Are you a leader?
That's a harder question than I think you may know. But first of all, before I answer that question, I want to just say what an amazing panel. The three women who spoke were remarkable, open, transparent, thoughtful. I just really, really enjoyed that panel, and I want to thank them for participating in this. As you said, I learned a lot, and I took copious notes. So just wanted to say, again, thank you. And going back to your question, am I a leader? I was a leader as part of my job. But what's interesting to me is that how do you become a leader? Some people are just innately there. They get it. They have an understanding of how to be a leader. There are others who need to find a path to progress towards becoming a leader. And that was my sort of path. I didn't really think that this was something that was going to be in my cards. But I was blessed with having tremendous mentors, folks who really took the time, energy, and effort to say, you have something here, you need to develop it, you need to think through how to better address these issues. And you can then not only give back more to yourself, but you can give back to those around you and to the organizations that you're working with. And so to me, my role, my sort of path to becoming a leader was a progression. It was hearing what these mentors had to say and then internalizing them. One of the things that has been mentioned a couple of times during the panel was this issue of developing trust with those that are around you. And that is so key, because as you take on more and more leadership responsibilities, people watch you, they look at you. They have you under a microscope, and every action you take, everything you do is scrutinized. Is this person walking the talk? Is she in fact saying something that makes sense? What are her behaviors? What are his behaviors? And also you have to understand that as you get, and this is something, some advice that I received from one of my mentors, probably one of the most important people in my career development, said, as you are increasing your responsibilities within an organization, as you're rising in an organization, your voice needs to get quieter and quieter. Because as you become a leader, as you become responsible for larger and larger parts of a business or an organization, people think anything you say is critically important. And so if you say it in a way that is emotional, evocative, pushy, it may not mean, you may not mean that, but that's the way people perceive you. And so leadership, becoming a leader is, in my case, was a journey to identify ways that I could be most effective. I'm a type A personality, and I do believe that I know the best way to get things done. But that's not the role of a leader. The role of a leader is to develop the people around them and to surround themselves with people who really are effective, smart, and who want to do the right thing. And that means you have to give them the power to be able to do what they think is right. And that means listening to them.
Right.
Hearing, and not just listening, hearing what they have to say, really, really hearing it. And then backing away, saying, you know what, I think that makes sense. Let's give that a try. And you take it, you lead it. So I think the other piece of being a leader is to really develop the people that are around you, to find ways that they can succeed, and to put them in roles and in positions that will allow them to grow. So the answer to the question is yes, I was a leader, but it didn't come naturally to me. And it was something that, through the grace of the mentors that I had and my own type A personality, it was evolutionary. It was a progression.
So let me ask you a little bit more about that. So when you realized that certainly your mentors saw in you these leadership qualities, something you could develop, did you resist that initially? Was it a hard thing to accept for you?
It was not in my original DNA. I was kind of a loner. I mean, my background is I'm an attorney. And as you know, Masami, lawyers tend to be individual contributors. They're not necessarily team players. You come in, you help people solve a problem, you give advice, you influence them to try to make the right decisions, and then you leave.
Right. Move on.
Move on.
Right.
So that was kind of where my mindset was. And so moving from a legal background, from a legal role into a leadership role, my first true leadership role outside the law department was to take on communications, government affairs. And that meant taking a team, developing a team, learning the dynamics of true teamwork, which is not something they teach you in law school, frankly.
That's right. That's right.
But it is something that mentors and others who care about you are willing to help you work through. And there were some comments that were made earlier on that there are some areas where women are perceived differently than men. So if I'm going to be assertive and I'm going to be demanding, sometimes people say, she's being a bitch.
Right, right. I know.
On the other hand, if you sit quietly in the conference room, if you don't raise your hand, if you don't speak up frequently, then it's like, well, she's got nothing to say. As opposed to, I'm listening, I'm hearing, I'm processing. And then when I have something that I feel I can contribute, I'm going to share that with you. So you begin to figure out ways to modify your leadership style to address some of these inherent perceptions, these stereotypes that were mentioned earlier. How do you sort of walk that tightrope between what societal stereotypes happen to be and what you really need to have to be effective?
Yes. And then, given your own inherent qualities and then everything else too, that's different and specific to each person. I mean, that's a lot you got to figure out. And speaking of that, you know, you're in an industry, somebody else mentioned this, I think it was Nozomi-san that was talking about, you know, the cargo division. You were in the tire industry, which is traditionally known as sort of male dominated, you know, sort of space. Were there things like that that may have worked against you in becoming such a compelling leader, or did those things not matter in your case? Was it more of those sort of you resisting the idea, or you not being aware of the idea first and then sort of growing into a leader that was more of the barrier in your case?
I think part of the what occurred in my career was I was fortunate to come up in the organization during a time when company leadership really was looking at results and not necessarily gender stereotypes or gender roles. That's not to say that there weren't some instances where that gender stereotype played a role. For example, when I became the head of communications for the Americas, as part of the design of the role, they said, we're not going to have you do the motorsports communications piece because you have small children. And we know, and this gets to the point that was made earlier about protecting, Nozomi-san's point about it's not ill intent. It was, I'm going to protect you because we know you have a family life, you're a mom, and you really can't be on the road as much as you would need to be if you had the responsibility for motorsports communications as well. So we're going to remove that from your portfolio. Again, you know, and I could say, it's fine, I can do this, it's all right. My husband is an amazing human being and would fully embrace the additional role that he would take on as a caregiver. It's okay. And the answer was no. Now, that didn't last long, granted, but that initial sort of shock of, yeah, you need to not be doing this because you have a family. That question was never part of my predecessor's conversation.
Of course. And I assume he was not female, right?
He was not female and he had
Right.
kids.
Right.
So, but it evolved. And so over time, the leadership of the organization, both at Bridgestone Americas and at Bridgestone Corporation in Japan, really began to focus on who are the best people to do these particular tasks or roles. I did have a bit of a trial by fire back in 2000, you know, more than 20 years ago, where there was a communications and PR hoo-ha. And I think that being able to work through that, to be part of the team that saw the company go, you know, face that issue, resolve the issue, become successful, reorganize, and really be stronger for it, that helped with my reputation within the organization. And the leadership, which is now focused on how do we do things better? How do we harvest the talent that's already inherent in the organization, and then use that talent to really provide shareholder value? That's how that started. And the leadership, which again, I think is potentially unique to Bridgestone Corporation. It was, what can you do? How can you do it? Are you consistent with the values that we show? And the person who became the CEO during the sort of the height of my sort of increasing responsibility was very well aware of the fact that there are gender stereotypes in the US and in Japan, and he actively worked against them.
Right.
And so that my area, my ability to succeed really was a lot of perspiration, inspiration, but also the benefit and the fortune, the good fortune of having this as individual as a leader.
Well, I mean, I'm going to say this because you're so modest. I mean, clearly it worked out really well that Bridgestone, and I happen to know the corporation really well, with its North American headquarters being in Nashville and us working with them. But you know, it happens to be a very innovative sort of progressive company when it comes to diversity and inclusion. But at the same time, I mean, they would not have promoted you or made you a leader had you not had those leadership qualities, and you were a high performer and achiever, clearly. So I think it really worked out well for both sides, I guess, that you were part of that organization that happened to really want to engage in that diversity and really making sure they looked at people for who they are instead of, gender or any other issues and stereotypes like that. So you've talked about, so the industry, there were some things, of course, earlier on in your career that may have worked against you because you're female, the stereotypes and people sort of, they had good intent, but really just maybe misplaced. You had to earn it. You had to kind of work your way up to getting what a male counterpart would have received on the front end, perhaps. What about you mentioned your husband, who has been a great partner to you, supporter, helped with your kids. But were there other competing interests other than raising kids? The industry, Japanese culture, in your case, did not work against you, but were there other things that were competing interests that may have you had to work through?
I think one of the biggest ones was internal, frankly, because I grew up in the same culture that created this belief that women, for example, on the motorsports issue, you've got kids, you've got a family, therefore we're going to remove that piece from your portfolio. But I grew up in that same context, in that same culture. So having to overcome my own internal voices saying, should I really be doing this? Is this really fair to my husband? And this was raised earlier during the panel conversation, I need to do it all. I need to be able to be the primary caregiver. I need to be the person who, still has a career. I need to be able to manage all of these things, and I don't ask for help.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the biggest things that I needed to overcome, was to say, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to develop something of a relationship that's maybe unique. So for example, when we had nannies for years for the kids, because my husband was also a practicing attorney. I was working, and the best nanny in the world that we ever had, it was a team. It was her husband and her, came to us and said, you know what, we came to Nashville to build a music career, and it's time for us to really get out of this particular area of work and really begin to build our own career. And so she resigned. Gave us plenty of notice and everything else. And so I'm like, oh my God, now what do we do? Because she's really, really good. So one day I called my husband from work and I said, listen, I got the idea. I just got a line on a nanny. She's awesome. This is the person we need to hire to replace the one that is going to be moving on. And Marty, to his credit, said, you know what, the kids really do deserve to have a full-time parent. And I know what your calendar is like. I know what your schedule is like. How about if we split these duties? How about if I take responsibility for the kids and I go part-time? And it was an amazing conversation. It was the ability to say, okay, I need help. I can't continue to do it this way. I've lost a resource. And it was a bit of a shock to me to think that, yeah, it's okay. It's perfectly okay to let go and to allow your spouse, someone who really cares as much as you do about the kids, to take on that primary responsibility. So a lot of this was internal to me. The other piece, frankly, is also the cultural stereotypes. It's kind of like when you're sitting in those conference rooms and there's this great conversation going on, and you know that you'd love to weigh in, but you got to be almost 95% sure that what you're going to say is going to be relevant.
Right.
Guys don't care about that.
Yeah.
They're, if they've got the preponderance of the evidence in their favor,
that's right.
They're going to speak up, and it creates good conversation.
Yeah.
Women, at least in my case, I felt like I really had to be, especially as I was coming up in the organization, I had to be spot on.
Yeah.
And so it became a learning experience for me. How do I change that thought process? How do I get over that reluctance to be, God, what if I say it and it's wrong? What are they going to think about me and my abilities? And you know what? It's okay. It's okay to be maybe off base once in a while. Can't do it all the time, because then that's a whole nother issue. But
Right.
if you're just part of a vigorous debate and you're willing to chime in before you have like 100% lined up, that's great.
That's right. That's right.
And that's really the importance. So a lot of it was internal for me.
Yeah. And preponderance of the evidence versus beyond a reasonable doubt, right?
Exactly.
Speak. And although I guess I have also heard people say that it is a good thing women are around, because we do need that sort of, careful perspective too. And if everybody was doing this is about 40% right, and just started to act on that, that's probably not a good idea for the whole world in general. But anyway, yes. So this came out in the panel too, the idea that we are really sort of the internal struggle, as you say, that we have to overcome, in addition to the stereotypes and what other people are putting on us as female leaders. And let me just change directions a little bit. Like, can you speak a little bit about, as you look back at your very, very successful career and your leadership positions, everything you've accomplished? You and I talked about this briefly when we were talking about this discussion. Just a couple of pain points that you're willing to share, things that maybe, if there was such a thing, you would have done differently. Perhaps it's more about perspective. I don't know.
Yeah, I think as they say, hindsight is 20/20. I think this came out in the panel conversation as well. Women tend to really do 110% in order to feel like they are entitled to have a seat at the table. At least that's my perception. I think that it's not unique. But what that does is then it takes away time from other things. And when I stop and think about, where the priorities were, family was there, but I could have done more. I could have been at more of the events that my kids were engaged in. And a lot of times I'd be on the road. So knowing that it's okay to say, no, I can't do that. I can ask for help. I can say, can one of my trusted team, can you take care of this time around? And it's a growth opportunity for them, but it also gives me that capacity that I otherwise didn't have. So that's a hindsight kind of a thing. It's like, yeah, maybe I could have balanced that a little bit more. But the other thing that would really happen is work became my world, basically. And so I'm now trying to reconnect with folks that I grew up with, that people that were close to me when we were still living, for example, in Chicago. And, they have reached out occasionally, and I've just not been very good about getting back to them. And so my goal now is to say, I'm going to try to at least partially rectify that gap, and really try to reconnect and build those social connections again, which really had to suffer as a result of just, there's only so many hours in the day, so many days in a week, so many weeks in a year.
Right.
Different so those are those two areas that I find that if I had it to do over again, a learning experience, if my younger self knew then what the older self knows now, I would have made more time.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that honest feedback perspective. We just have a couple minutes left, unfortunately, but I wanted to ask you to finish by talking about, so I asked about pain points. Now I want to ask about all your accomplishments. And when you look back at everything you've achieved so far, which one or two are you most proud of and why? And then if you could also just close us by any words of wisdom for the audience, younger women and men who are listening today.
Well, there's two, frankly. One is very personal, and that is I am the daughter of Polish immigrants. They emigrated to the U.S. after World War II. Neither one of them finished. They didn't even have grade school. These were farmers. They came to the U.S. with nothing, but they were bound and determined that their children would get the best possible education that they could provide. And so one of my proudest accomplishments was to be able to deliver to my parents an undergraduate degree, but also a law degree. Mm-hmm. And being first in the family and this is why MTSU is so important to me, mm-hmm. because I was a first of my family to not only finish high school, forget about graduate school. Mm-hmm. So I was able to give him it, and I'm really proud of that, mm-hmm. because it made my father so unbelievably happy. And I remember when he dropped me off at the University of Illinois, when he emigrated to the US, he actually worked at a farm not far from the U of I. Mm-hmm. And he often saw these students coming to campus, and he was like, I can't believe I'm bringing my daughter here.
Oh, wow.
And that to me was great.
And what was that connection to Middle Tennessee State University?
So MTSU, I'm on the board of trustees at Middle Tennessee State University. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they really serve a very different population of students, non-traditional. Right. So I feel a connection to them, and I feel that my service mm-hmm. on that board is a little bit of giving back. Mm. Wonderful. My parents and others. And so that's a really important pride point for me. And mm-hmm. the other one really is sort of the holistic professional world that I was able to inhabit. It was not anything I could have ever achieved or dreamed of achieving, frankly, when I was growing up in Chicago. Being part of the Olympics, being the person who helped Bridgestone on its sustainability journey, doing the kind of work, sitting on a global stage, working with a global organization as part of their executive committee. Those are things that are just, when you take them collectively, blow my mind. And to me, having been able to do that is something that I'm extremely proud of. And I'm extremely grateful for the support that I've received from folks who really helped me. Someone said earlier that really leaders are carried up, and that's exactly the way I feel about it. So those are my 2 points.
Well, thank you. And I see your life and hear you speak, and you are a servant leader and such a great example to those who go behind you. So thank you, Chris, so much.
Thank you, Masami. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. This was an amazing event, and thank you for allowing me to be part of it.
Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to hand it over to Suzanne.
Thank you so much, everybody. I still have chills from that last answer, Chris. That was fantastic. So I had the honor of wrapping this up. And I just want to thank the Embassy of Japan for their support over the many years for the regional women's leadership dialogues that we've been able to have. And it's really helpful, I think, to be able to bring in voices that are not necessarily part of the conversation by going to different regions. And it also allows us to think about the different cultural contexts, but also just see so many things that are universal across the communities and also across the cultures between Japan and the United States. I just wanted to kind of hit some of the takeaways I had. And, first of all, Masami's moderation was fantastic. And she just started us off by asking this provocative question, and I'm sure got all of us thinking about what leadership is. And the panelists and Chris's answers were so helpful. And really, what came away for me was just this whole idea of the journey of leadership, and starting with intentionality. And what kind of leader do we want to be, and are we going to be leaders? And then what kind of leader And I really liked the idea that was, I think it was Maki who said that being leaders and learners together at the same time, and really embracing the differences and being comfortable by being uncomfortable. And then finding our purposes. And then I really thought it was helpful to think about what is our authentic self. And it's not easy to find our authentic self. And so we had a lot of tips today about relying on mentors, reaching out to mentors, looking at role models, and building skills that you need to better be your image of yourself as a leader, summoning the courage and then taking action. Maybe it's changing careers, starting your own company, getting a coach, working on the skills you need. And what a theme everybody talked about, learning how to ask for and accepting help. And that allows us to grow into our leadership roles, see ourselves as leaders. And then I think we all took down this idea of being a leader of our own life as a goal, which isn't self-centered. It can be servant leadership, leadership from behind. And then as leaders, I think the other set of messages were really about taking care of ourselves and then giving back. So I would like to just sort of, before we get into appreciation, take a moment to encourage everybody to, maybe with a call to action, that something I took away is, we should all, and I'm going to ask all of you to do this, to think about in the next few days, taking the time to encourage someone around you, ideally a woman around you, that you see leadership potential in, and encourage them and tell them what you see, because we saw how important that was to our panelists, for people to help them see themselves on that leadership journey. And then also for ourselves to take the time to have the confidence to hear that when we're hearing it from other people. I think that's the way we can all grow out of this, besides the inspiration, maybe some action we can take. All right, so now I just want to, of course, say thank you, Masami, for organizing this event, finding fantastic speakers for us, and really guiding us through with such thoughtful questions. I thank all the speakers for their time and their insights and their honesty that they shared with us. Again, I'd like to thank the Embassy of Japan for their support for this program. And finally, I'd like to recognize the sponsors to the US-Japan Council who allow us to continue all the programming that we're doing over the years. I specifically want to just mention our platinum sponsors, Amazon, the Aratani Foundation, Deloitte, and Fabit. And our title sponsors, the Central Pacific Bank, Google, Hitachi, Ito-En, Mitsui, MUFG, NEC, Oryx, the Terasaki Nibei Foundation, the Toshizo Watanabe Foundation, and the Toyota Research Institute. I'm going to show, actually, Ali here is sharing a couple slides of additional sponsors. These are our signature sponsors. And I hope you'll take a look at this. Here are our premier sponsors. We can't do what we do without the companies and the individuals that support us. And so we really want to make sure that we let them know how much we appreciate them. So, and with that, I think I'm going to close the event. And again, thank you for being part of this. We've had an incredible turnout, wonderful chats in the chat room, and we will be recording this and making this available to others to share. And as Masami said, there's some of those answers were so rich that we just need some time to think about them a little bit more. So you'll get a chance to once we post this recording on our website. Thank you for being part of today's event.